The fall. They say humiliation is one of the greatest teachers. But when it happened to me, it didn't feel like a lesson. It felt like death. I remember that day as clearly as if it were branded into my memory. The cafeteria of the office buzzed with laughter, coffee cups clinking and the usual morning chatter. I was standing by the vending machine, pretending to scroll through my phone, trying to ignore the stares. My clothes were old, the edges of my shirt frayed, and my shoes had lost their shine. I had been struggling for months. My car had been repossessed. My rent was late again. I had skipped lunch 3 days in a row, drinking only water to keep my stomach quiet. No one really knew how bad it was. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. "Hey, Michael," a voice called out. It was Ryan, the guy everyone in the office loved. He had the kind of fake charisma that worked on people who never looked too deep. "Didn't you say you'd buy coffee for the team last week? Or was that before you went broke?" Laughter, a wave of it. Even the receptionist, who had once been kind to me, chuckled softly behind her cup. I forced a smile, trying to brush it off. "I'm just trying to save up," I said quietly. "Save up?" Ryan sneered. "Man, you couldn't save a dime if your life depended on it." He looked around, grinning at the others. "Maybe we should start a GoFundMe for Michael. Poor guy probably can't even afford Wi-Fi." My hands trembled slightly, but I said nothing. I'd learned that silence was safer than confrontation. When you're broke, even defending yourself feels like a luxury you can't afford. What hurt most wasn't the laughter. It was a look of pity from a few who didn't laugh. The quiet, uncomfortable sympathy that said, "We're glad it's not us." When lunch break came, I slipped out of the building and sat on the curb behind the office. I pulled out my phone and checked my balance again, $2.67. I'd applied for 37 jobs in the past 2 months. 37. No callbacks. No interviews. Nothing. I stared at the gray sky and whispered, "Why me?" That's when my phone buzzed. An email notification. It was from them. A company I had pitched a business idea to 2 years earlier. Back when I still had hope. Back when I believed in myself. They had rejected me then, saying my idea was too ambitious for a man with no capital or experience. Now, the email subject line read, "Partnership opportunity. Urgent response requested." I almost didn't open it. I thought it was a scam. But curiosity won. Inside was a message from their CEO. A different one than before. He'd read about an old tech concept I'd published online, one I had long abandoned. Apparently, their market research had shifted, and suddenly my too ambitious idea was exactly what they needed. They wanted to meet immediately. That night, I barely slept. My heart wouldn't stop racing. I didn't have a suit or even decent shoes, but I still ironed the least wrinkled shirt I owned and polished my shoes with a towel and water. When I walked into their sleek glass building the next morning, I felt like an imposter, a broke man pretending to belong in a world built for people who never had to worry about rent. But as the meeting began, something changed. They didn't laugh. They didn't look down on me. They listened. For 2 hours, I spoke about my vision, the same one I'd been mocked for, dismissed for, and laughed at for. I explained how my idea could revolutionize the logistics division, reduce costs, and scale globally. When I finished, there was silence. Then the CEO leaned forward and said, "We'd like to partner with you, but not as a consultant. We want you to lead this project as director." I froze. My mouth went dry. I don't even work for your company." I said softly. "You do now," he replied, smiling, "if you accept." I left that building trembling, not from fear, from disbelief. It felt surreal. After years of rejection, after nights spent wondering if I'd ever be enough, I finally had a chance. Not out of pity, not out of luck, but because of something I had created, something they couldn't ignore. But the best part wasn't the offer. It was what I saw on the company letterhead as I walked out, their new acquisition list. At the top of it, my old company, the same one where Ryan and the others had laughed at me. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the folder, rain starting to fall lightly against my face. The irony was almost poetic. I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, everything changes." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every insult, every smirk, every moment I've been made to feel small. I remembered the cafeteria laughter, the sneers, the pity, and I remembered something my mother once told me when I was a boy. One day they'll laugh, but not for the same reason. For the first time in years, I smiled. The next day, I would walk into that office not as the man they mocked, but as the man who now owned the keys to their future. They had laughed when I was broke. Tomorrow they would stand. The return. I didn't sleep that night. Every tick of the clock sounded louder than my own heartbeat. The folder with the company logo, their company, sat on my desk, illuminated by the faint glow of the city lights filtering through my window. I traced the embossed letters on the cover, my mind spinning in disbelief. It was real. I had read the document 10 times. The company that had mocked me, dismissed me, and laughed at my struggle was now a subsidiary of the very corporation that had hired me as their new director. The irony was almost too perfect. As dawn broke, I stood before the mirror, buttoning the same shirt they used to tease me for wearing too often. I didn't need new clothes. Not today. Today, I wanted them to see me exactly as I was. The man they had laughed at, the one they thought would never rise again. When I stepped into the building, the familiar scent of burnt coffee and cheap air freshener hit me like a wave of déjà vu. The same posters on the wall. The same flickering light by the elevator. Only this time, I wasn't here to beg for validation. The receptionist, the same one who had laughed quietly behind her mug, froze when she saw me. "Michael," she stammered, you're back." I smiled faintly. You could say that. As I walked past her, whispers rippled through the open office. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. It felt like time itself had paused to watch. Ryan was the first to speak. He stood up from his chair, half smiling, half confused. Well, look who's back. What happened, man? Did they finally run out of coffee at the unemployment line? Laughter again. Softer this time. Uneasy. I didn't respond. I just placed my folder on the conference table and looked around the room. Every face, every smirk, every memory. "I'm here for the management meeting," I said calmly. Ryan frowned. "That's for directors only." "I know." I said, "Meeting is gays. That's why I'm here." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Ryan blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Just then, the glass door swung open and Mr. Donovan, the regional CO, walked in. His suit was immaculate, his tone sharp. "Good morning, everyone. I assume you've all met your new director of operations." He turned to me with a nod. "Michael, welcome to the team." The air seemed to vanish from the room. Ryan's jaw dropped. The receptionist outside covered her mouth. Someone actually dropped a coffee cup, the sound echoing like punctuation to the moment. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just shook Mr. Donovan's hand and said, "Thank you. It's good to be back." The meeting began, but no one really focused on the agenda. Eyes kept darting toward me, searching for confirmation that this wasn't a cruel joke. I spoke only when necessary, my voice steady, measured, a stark contrast to the man they remembered. When the meeting ended, Ryan approached me, his expression strained somewhere between disbelief and resentment. "So you're the new boss?" he asked. "I am," I replied quietly. He forced a laugh. "Man, I don't get it. You couldn't even afford lunch last month. Now you're running the place? How?" I looked at him, not with anger, not with pride, but with something deeper. You don't always need money to build something valuable, Ryan. Sometimes all you need is faith and time. He scoffed, trying to hide his discomfort. "Guess you got lucky." "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe luck has nothing to do with it." The rest of the day passed in a haze of murmurs and sideways glances. People who had once ignored me now smiled nervously, offering compliments that tasted like guilt. One by one, they approached me, congratulating me, pretending they had always believed in me. I listened politely, but inside, I could still feel the sting of the past. The cafeteria laughter, the whispered jokes, the feeling of being invisible. At lunch, I walked back to that same vending machine. The one where Ryan had humiliated me. I put a coin in, pressed for coffee, and waited. Ryan walked by, glancing over. You really like that old thing, huh? I smiled faintly. It's a reminder. Of what? He asked. That people only laugh until they realize who they're laughing at. He didn't respond. He just walked away, his face pale. Over the next few weeks, I worked relentlessly. My ideas, the ones they had once mocked, became the blueprint for the company's restructuring. Revenue climbed. Efficiency improved. For the first time, people started to see results they couldn't ignore. But something else happened, too. The same people who had once mocked me began to respect me, and it felt strange. Empty, even. Respect that comes only after success feels hollow. One evening, long after everyone had left, I stood alone in the office, looking out over the city lights. The glass walls reflected the man I had become, calm, successful, powerful. But I couldn't help asking myself, was it worth it? All the pain, the humiliation, the nights without sleep, the hunger, the silence, the loneliness. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But one thing was certain. I would never let anyone make me feel small again. A few days later, I was invited to a corporate dinner. The top executives were there, including Mr. Donovan, the CEO who had given me the opportunity. As the night went on, he pulled me aside and said, Michael, you've done extraordinary work. The board is impressed. There's talk of promoting you again, possibly into a regional role. I was speechless. A promotion? Already? He smiled. But there's something you should know. The previous owner, the millionaire who sold us his company, wants to meet you. He's curious about the man who turned his failed investment into a success story. The words hit me like a wave. The millionaire. The same man who had once laughed in my face when I pitched him my idea. The man who called me a broke dreamer playing businessman. And now he wanted to meet me. That night, as I drove home, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked different. Not because of power or wealth, but because I finally saw a man who had faced hell and survived it. But deep down, something whispered, the real test hasn't even begun. Because revenge, the kind that truly changes you, isn't about laughter or power. It's about what happens when the people who once broke you come asking for your help. And soon he would. The millionaire. The email came late at night. Short, formal, cold. Mr. Harris would like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. Mr. Harris. The name alone made my chest tighten. The man who once looked me in the eye and said, You'll never make it in this business, kid. Come back when you stop dreaming and started living in reality. That sentence had haunted me for years. Now he wanted a meeting. I stared at the screen for a long time. My mind split between disbelief and anger. Why now? Why after all this time? He had humiliated me, discarded me. And now that I had built something real, something undeniable, he wanted to talk? I replied with a single line. I'll be there tomorrow at noon. The next day, the city felt different. The air heavier, the sky gray, clouds hanging low like a curtain before a storm. When I arrived at the restaurant, I recognized it immediately. It was the same place where I had pitched my idea years ago. The same polished marble floors, the same chandelier that once reflected my nervous face. Only this time, I wasn't the one waiting. He was. Mr. Harris sat at a corner table, impeccably dressed as always, his silver hair perfectly combed, his watch gleaming with quiet arrogance. But there was something different about his eyes, less fire, more fatigue. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. Michael, he said, standing to shake my hand. It's been a long time. I nodded, taking a seat. It has. There was a pause, the kind of silence that stretches far beyond words. You've done well for yourself, he said finally. I've been following your progress. Impressive work. I smiled slightly. Funny, you didn't seem so impressed when I showed you this idea the first time. He didn't flinch, just sighed. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The waiter poured water. The sound of it filled the silence between us. I won't waste your time, he said. I need help. Those words from him were surreal. Help. I asked, leaning back. My new venture, he explained. I've made some poor investments. The market shifted faster than expected, and, well, he hesitated, searching for pride he no longer had. I could use someone with your expertise, someone who understands innovation the way you do. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Here he was, the man who once dismissed me as worthless, now asking for my help. What makes you think I'd help you? I asked quietly. He looked at me, eyes tired. Because you're not like me, Michael. You still believe in people, even when they don't deserve it. The words hit harder than I expected. As the lunch went on, he spoke about his failures, about the projects that collapsed, the partners who betrayed him, the fortune he'd watched crumble piece by piece. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have smiled at his downfall, but I didn't. All I felt was sadness, because I realized something. The man who had once laughed at my dreams wasn't powerful anymore. He was broken, just like I had been. I know I hurt you, he said finally. I was arrogant. I saw your hunger as foolishness. I thought money was everything. But watching you build something from nothing, it humbled me. He leaned forward. I want to invest in your project, whatever your next idea is. I don't care what it costs. I just want to be a part of it. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The universe had twisted itself into irony, so sharp it almost hurt. I looked him in the eyes. You once told me I'd never make it, that I was just a broke kid chasing fantasies. Do you remember that? He nodded slowly. I do. And now you want in? Yes, he said, because now I understand what I couldn't see then, that your dreams were never foolish. They were fearless. The sincerity in his voice disarmed me, but the anger inside me still burned quietly, like a coal refusing to die. I thought of all the nights I had gone hungry, all the laughter, all the humiliation, all the times I had doubted myself because of people like him. I'm not sure I can trust you, I said finally. You don't have to trust me, he replied softly. Just give me a chance to do one right thing before it's too late. When the meeting ended, I walked out into the cold air, the city lights reflecting in puddles on the pavement. My head was spinning. Part of me wanted to reject him, to let him feel the same dismissal he had given me. But another part of me, the part that had survived failure and hunger and pain, whispered, this is bigger than revenge. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my head. You still believe in people, even when they don't deserve it. Was that true? Did I still believe? Or had success hardened me into the very kind of man I once despised? Days passed. I didn't respond to his offer. But fate doesn't wait. One morning, Megan, my new executive assistant, came running into my office. Michael, you need to see this, she said, handing me a tablet. On the screen was a headline that made my stomach drop. Former tycoon Jonathan Harris hospitalized after heart attack amid financial collapse. I froze. Megan hesitated. Should I reach out to his office? They say he's stable, but... No, I said quickly. Then softer. No, I'll go myself. The hospital was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. When I entered his room, he looked small, fragile, a man stripped of his armor. The monitors beeped steadily beside him. He opened his eyes when he saw me. You came, he whispered. I did. He smiled weakly. I didn't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want the last thing you remembered about me to be my laughter. I sat down beside him. Why me, Harris? Why reach out to the man you once crushed? Because, he said slowly, you became everything I wasn't brave enough to be. He closed his eyes, breathing shallow. Do me one favor, Michael, keep believing. The world needs more of that. I left the hospital with a heavy heart. The city was still buzzing, alive and indifferent, but inside me something had shifted. That night, I looked out the same office window where I had once stood as a broke, humiliated man everyone laughed at. Now I was on top. But the view didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. Because maybe the real revenge isn't proving them wrong. Maybe it's proving that they never broke you in the first place. The next morning, I sent a message to Harris's team. Tell Mr. Harris I accept his partnership. But on one condition, this time we build something that helps people who are like me. They replied, he'll be honored. As I sat back in my chair, the sun rising to the window, I realized that life had come full circle. The boy they laughed at was gone. The man they underestimated was no longer fighting for revenge. He was fighting for purpose. But I could still feel it. Deep inside, the faint whisper of destiny. Something was coming. Something bigger. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a new one. The legacy. The news came on a quiet Sunday morning. Mr. Harris had passed away in his sleep. I stared at the phone for a long time, unable to move. The world outside my window felt frozen. Cars motionless. The city muffled under a blanket of gray clouds. For a man who had once towered over me like a god, his end felt painfully human. There was no headline-worthy scandal, no final act of redemption, just silence. I sank into my chair and whispered to myself, "You made peace, old man. That's more than most ever do." The funeral was small, fewer people than I expected, a handful of colleagues, a few family members, some old rivals disguised as mourners. The air smelled of wet grass and expensive regret. I stood at the back, watching as they lowered the casket. My chest tightened when I saw his name engraved in gold. Jonathan Harris, a man who once defined my nightmares, now reduced to a name on stone. When everyone else had left, I stayed behind. I placed a folded piece of paper on the coffin, a letter I'd written the night before. It simply said, "You taught me the power of being underestimated. Rest easy." After that day, something shifted inside me. For months, I threw myself into work, expanding the company, growing faster than ever. Our innovations began changing lives. Education programs for poor, micro grants for young entrepreneurs, shelters for the homeless. People call me the man who rose from nothing. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I rose from pain, from humiliation, from nights I couldn't afford a meal, but still refused to stop dreaming. And somehow, that story, my story, had become fuel for thousands of others. One afternoon, Megan walked into my office with a bright smile. "You should see this," she said, holding a stack of letters. "These came in just this week." I raised an eyebrow. "More partnership proposals?" She shook her head. "No, letters from kids. People who heard your speech at the youth summit." I took the letters in my hands. Each one had shaky handwriting, but the same message echoed through all of them. "Thank you for showing me it's possible." I had to blink back tears. That night, I walked through the city alone, no chauffeur, no luxury suit, no headlines. Just me, a hoodie and a coffee in hand. The neon lights reflected in puddles like fractured dreams. I passed by the diner. That diner, the place where it had all begun, where I was once laughed at, dismissed, belittled. The sign still flickered. The smell of burnt coffee still lingered in the air. And behind the counter was someone new, a young waitress, maybe 19, with eyes full of exhaustion and quiet fire. She reminded me of me. I took a seat. She handed me a menu without looking up. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Coffee," I said. "Black." She nodded, then hesitated. "You look familiar. Are you?" I smiled faintly. "Just someone who's been here before." When she brought the coffee, she apologized for the chipped cup. "Sorry," she said softly. "We're short on supplies. The manager says replacements aren't in the budget." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the same fear I used to carry, the fear of being stuck. "What's your dream?" I asked suddenly. She frowned. "My dream? Yeah, if money wasn't an issue, what would you do?" She hesitated, then laughed nervously. "Honestly, I'd open a bakery. My grandma taught me to bake when I was little. But people laugh when I say that. They say I should be realistic." Her words hit me like thunder. They laughed at me because I was broke. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a business card, and placed it on the counter. "When people laugh, it usually means they're too afraid to try," I said quietly. "Don't let their fear become your truth." She picked up the card and read my name. Her eyes widened. Wait, are you? But I was already standing up. Good luck with the bakery, I said, smiling. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I couldn't stop thinking about that girl. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dream, even if she didn't believe it could ever happen. So I made a decision. I called Megan. Find out who owned that diner on 6th Avenue, I said, and see if they'd be interested in selling. Within a week, the paperwork was done. The diner was mine. I closed it for renovations, kept the staff on payroll, and had a local bakery team redesign the space with her in mind. When it reopened a month later, there was a new sign above the door, Grandma's Promise. And standing in front of it, holding the keys with trembling hands, was the same waitress. She looked at me in disbelief. You bought this? No, I said gently. You did. I just believed in your dream before the world did. She started crying. I just smiled because I understood those weren't just tears of gratitude. They were tears of finally being seen. Months later, Grandma's Promise became a city favorite. Lines wrapped around the block every morning. She hired other young people with stories like hers. Kids who'd been told they'd never make it. Every time I walked by, I'd see her laughing behind the counter, serving coffee in those same chipped cups she once apologized for. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same place that once broke me had become a symbol of rebirth. One evening, after another long day, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the city lights pulse like stars below. I thought of Harris, of the waitress, of the boy I used to be, all the laughter, all the pain, all the people who said I'd never be enough. And for the first time, I felt no anger, no need to prove anything, just peace. Because maybe success isn't about walking in as their boss. Maybe it's about walking in as the person you were always meant to become. The wind brushed against my face. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, fading into the heartbeat of the city. I whispered into the night. They laughed at me because I was broke, but they'll remember me because I never stopped believing. Then I turned away from the window, picked up my phone, and opened a blank note titled, The Next Dream. Because even after everything,